Hi, Algebra 1. In this last lesson, you're going to be doing the quadratic formula. So here we go. So far, you have learned two different ways to solve quadratic equations. The first way we did was using the square root, and that was just solving equations using rules that we've done all year. So I gave you an example here where we subtract 3 from both sides, and then we took the square root of both sides. And the key in this one is that when you take the square root of a number, it can be the positive or the negative value of that. So x plus 2 could equal positive 5, or x plus 2 could equal negative 5 in this example. And we get two possible solutions. X could be 3, or x could be negative 7. So that's using the square roots. The other method that we've been working on is factoring. So I gave you an example here where I took the standard form and I rewrote it in its factored form and then found the values of x that made that equal to 0. Both of these methods are very helpful, but they're not going to work with every single quadratic. So that's where today we're going to be working with the quadratic formula, because this is something that will work for any quadratic, but it's maybe not the easiest. So when I think of like using tools in a toolbox, the square roots and factoring are going to be those tools that you reach for first. They're going to be the easiest to use. The quadratic formula is like your sledgehammer. It's going to work kind of as a last resort. It's maybe not going to be the easiest to use, but it will work every time. So again, this is going to be called the quadratic formula. This is what it looks like right here. You will not be expected to memorize this. It will be printed on the quiz for you. So when you are using the quadratic formula, you have your quadratic written in standard form. So your a is always going to be the number that is in front of your x squared. B is going to be the number that's in front of our x, and c is the number that's all by itself without a variable. So the example in your book is going to be showing you x squared plus 8 or minus 8x plus 15. And they tell you that a is 1 because in front of this x squared there's really a 1. B is negative 8, we can see that right there. And c is going to be 15. I don't know why this says 15x, it should just be 15. So the easiest thing to do is always write your quadratic formula and then start filling in the pieces. So we can see our quadratic formula right here. And this is negative b. So I'm going to take b, which was negative 8, and I'm going to put that in there for b. Notice that this negative is still there out front. Then we have plus or minus the square root of b squared, so here's my negative 8 squared, minus 4 times a, so I put in 1 for a, and put in 15 for c. That is all going to be divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 1. And then from this point on, it's just simplifying that. So you can see negative 8 is a positive 8. Negative 8 squared is positive 64. Minus 4 times 1 times 15, which is 60. And we just keep simplifying, all being divided by 2. Then the next step, 64 minus 60 is 4. Square root of 4 is going to be 2. And then now here's where we do have to have two separate possibilities. We could have 8 plus 2 divided by 2, so 8 plus 2 is 10 divided by 2, or we could have 8 minus 2 divided by 2, which would be 6 divided by 2. So that's how you end up with your two possible answers of 5 or 3. So here we go. We're going to work through some examples on this together. So first, I wrote the quadratic formula right here, and we're going to identify a, b, and c. So in this x squared, there's really a 1 out front there. We just don't see it. So that means a is 1. B is this 4 that's in front of x, and c is going to be negative 5. The negative needs to go with it there. So now we're going to plug these into our formula. So negative 4, because b is 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 5, all being divided by 2 times 1. And we just keep simplifying now. I'm going to simplify underneath the square root first. 4 squared is 16. And then I have negative 4 times 1 times negative 5, which is going to be a positive 20, all being divided by 2. And as we keep simplifying, underneath the square root, we're going to have 36, all being divided by 2. So now the square root of 36 is 6. And so this is where we're left with our two possible equations. So we could have x equals negative 4 plus 6 divided by 2, or we could have x equals negative 4 minus 6 divided by 2, and that's because of that plus or minus symbol that's been there from the beginning. And here we simplify. Negative 4 plus 6 is going to be positive 2 divided by 2 is going to be 1. Negative 4 minus 6 divided by 2 is going to be a negative 5. So again, first identify what A, B, and C are, plug them in, and the rest is just simplifying. You should end up with 2 answers when you're done. There are some possibilities where you're going to end up with maybe 1 answer, and that's okay. So we've identified in this second problem that A is going to be 1, B is 7, and C is 12. Okay, we made it through all of the simplifying. Now we have our 2 possibilities. X could be negative 7 plus 1 divided by 2, or x could be negative 7 minus 1 divided by 2, again, because of that plus or minus. And now we're going to simplify. This would be negative 6 over 2, which is negative 3, and this is going to be negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4. Now these problems are telling you what the solutions are, so you can see that, yep, I did it right. It matches those solutions. So you've identified A, B, and C. You have filled them into here. This is an example of a problem where we would have to use the quadratic formula. We could not factor this into nice factors like we've been doing. We have to use a quadratic formula here. So I've simplified down to this point. I have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 28 divided by 2. The square root of 28 does not come out nicely, and we're not going to use decimals in this. We're just going to leave it as a square root of 8. So my 2 possibilities are negative 10 plus the square root of 28 divided by 2, or x could be negative 10 minus the square root of 28 divided by 2 because of that plus or minus symbol. So these are our 2 answers. Your book is going to show that the answer is negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 28 divided by 2. And that's because you can simplify this a little bit. And when the whole thing is being divided by 2, it's really just like each part is being divided by 2. And negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So it is the same thing. I'm not super worried that you do that last step. If you can get to here, then you are good to go with the quadratic formula. So double check that you've gotten your A, B, and C correct. And one thing to notice here is that since B is negative 8, you have to keep this original negative here, and then when you plug in negative 8 for B, it really ends up being a negative 8. So just be very careful with that. All right, the square root of 20 doesn't come out evenly, so our answers are 8 plus the square root of 20 divided by 2 and 8 minus the square root of 20 divided by 2. So you still end up with 2 answers here because of that plus or minus symbol. Again, your book is going to tell you that it's 4 plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2. If you want to simplify that out, you can, but if you want to leave it as I have here, that is perfectly fine. When you simplify this one underneath the square root, we just get 0, and the square root of 0 is 0. So our only possibility in this case is 6 over 18, which does simplify to 1/3. That is why there's only one solution in this problem, and that's because under the square root, we ended up with 0. So in this one, you had to make sure that right here you have a negative 4 and then a negative 15, and those are being multiplied together. So you end up with a positive 360 there. So underneath the square root of 441 simplifies to 21. And now you have your 2 possibilities. X can be negative 9 plus 21, all that divided by 12, or x can be negative 9 minus 21, all of that being divided by 12. So there you have it. That's the quadratic formula and how you use it. Remember that we will not be expecting you to memorize the quadratic formula, but you do have to know how to use it. So we will be getting more practice on this, but make sure you ask any questions if you need.